Here are your notes for Chapter 10, Section 2. Just a quick reminder, we need to understand the difference between an experiment. An experiment is an activity in which results are observed, and each observation is called a trial, and each result is called an outcome. And the sample space is the set of all possible outcomes of an experiment. So an experiment might be something like flipping a coin, and the sample space would be heads and tails. An experiment might be rolling a number cube, like a die, and the sample space would be the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Or you might have an experiment like guessing the number of jelly beans in a jar, in which case the sample space would be all the whole numbers. So now if you look at your 10.2 notes, we want to talk about probability. The probability of an event is a number that measures the likelihood that the event will occur. Now, probabilities are always between 1 and 0. An event is any set of one or more outcomes, and the probability of an event, when you write it with P and then parentheses whatever the event is a number between 0 and 1, or 0% to 100%. And that tells you how likely the event is to happen. Now, a probability of 0 means the event is impossible. It can never happen. So the probability of you doing something that's impossible would be 0. The probability of 1 means the event is certain, or it has to happen. So the probability that the sun would come this morning is 1. The probabilities of all the outcomes in a sample space always add up to 1, or 100%. So look at this chart on your notes. Notice over here to the left, impossible has a probability of 0. Over to the right in green, certain has a probability of 1. But if you have a probability of 1/4 or 0.25 or 25%, that's going to be unlikely. It's not likely to happen. If you have a probability of 50%, it's equally likely and unlikely. And if you have a probability of 75%, it's quite likely. So on your notes it says, describe the likelihood of the event given its probability. So the probability that you land a jump on a snowboard is 1/2. And they're asking what would be the likelihood of that event. So 1/2 is right here, so you would say it's equally likely. Equally likely or unlikely, you can write it like that. Number 2, there's a 100% chance that the temperature will be less than 120 degrees Fahrenheit tomorrow. 100%, that means it is certain. So that's what you would want to have in your notes there. So when it asks for the likelihood of something, you're either going to say impossible, unlikely, equally likely, likely, or certain. So this is not on your notes. Let's look at it. There's an 80% chance of thunderstorms tomorrow. Describe the likelihood of the event. Well, 80% is close to 75. So you would say in this case that it is likely to rain. When the weathermen talk about percentages, they just kind of consider whether something is likely to happen or unlikely to happen. This one's also not on your notes. It says give the probability for each outcome. It says the basketball team has a 70% chance of winning the game. Now this one does not ask for the likelihood, where you'd say it's likely, but it says give the probability. The probability that they'll win, we're talking about percent, 70% chance of winning, that would be a 30% chance of losing. Now, back to your notes. The probability of an event is a ratio. We write P and then we write whatever the event is in parentheses. And it's always the number of favorable outcomes over the number of possible outcomes. So you're going to roll this number cube here. The probability, it says find the probability of an odd number. Now my odd numbers are 1, 3, and 5. So there's 3 of them. So the probability would be 3. That's a favorable of the possible, which is 6. Which reduces to 1/2. The probability of a number greater than 2, well, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all greater than 2, and that reduces to 2/3. The probability of 7 is 0. There are no 7s. So that would be an impossible thing. You cannot have a 7. This is also not on your notes, but just a reminder, probability can be a fraction, a ratio, a decimal, or a percent. Zero means it's impossible, 1 means it's certain, and it always adds up to 1. So back on your notes, the probability that you randomly draw a short straw from a group of 40 straws is 3 out of 20. So how many straws are there? Well, you're going to want to write a proportion for this. You've got 40 straws. And the probability of getting a short straw is 3 out of 20. So you want to know how many was that out of the 40 straws. So you could cross multiply and divide. Or you could use math logic, and 20 times 2 is 40, so 3 times 2 is 6. Either way, there's 6 straws. The probability that you randomly draw a short straw from a group of 75 straws is 1/15. Your probability is 1 out of 15, so how many is that out of 75? Excuse me. Call that and find out that there are 6. This was also not on your notes. Give the probability for each outcome. So, how many 1s are there? If you look on it, there are 3, so the probability would be 3 out of the total, which is 8. Probability of 2 is also 3 out of 8. And the probability of 3 is 2 out of 8. Now, all of these should be in simplest form. 3/8 is, but 2/8 you would want to reduce to 1/4. Now, here's another spinner. What's the probability it is not 2? Well, 7 out of the 8 are not 2. What's the probability the number is less than 7? Well, there are 6 numbers that are less than 7 out of the 8. 6/8 reduces to 3/4. Now, perfect square, we need to talk about that. It's any number that's squared. So 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, because it's multiplying by itself. 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16. So the perfect squares on here would be a 1 and a 4, and that's it. So 2 out of your 8 are perfect squares, and that reduces to 1 out of every 4. So on the bottom of your notes, the Punnett square is a grid. You suppose show the possible gene combinations for the offspring of 2 parents. In the Punnett square, boy is represented XY, and girl is XX. So completing this, we're going to have another XX here, and an XY, and an XY. So explain why the probability of 2 parents having a boy or girl is equally likely. Well, we'd say the probability of a girl is 2 out of 4, or 1/2. The probability of a boy is also 2 out of 4, or 1/2. So that's working with probability. Your homework is on page 410, and then you have a homework quiz.